Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cynthia if you're new here, and as you can tell, it is almost the end of January and I am just now posting my December reading recap because life has been very busy post-holiday season. I didn't think it would be. I am also kind of in a weird spot with my content where I'm rethinking a lot of my content and my strategy, and that's not really relevant to this video. Let's talk books. Let's talk December reading recap because I read quite a few interesting books in December and I have some thoughts. So, disclaimer, these are my opinions. I don't always say it, I forget, but in case it's needed, these are just my opinions and I'd love to hear your opinions. So, without any more intro banter, let's just jump right in. As always, if you see me looking down, it's because I am looking at my notes. But the first book up on the list is Do Your Worst by Rosie Danan. In Do Your Worst by Rosie Danan, sparks fly between an occult expert and a disgraced archaeologist in this enemies with benefits story. And I'm just going to pause because enemies with benefits, this book taught me that I am a tried and true enemies to lovers girly. I digress. Riley has the opportunity to turn her family's gift for the supernatural into a legitimate business when she is hired to break the curse on an infamous Scottish castle. Used to working alone, Riley is pleasantly surprised to meet a handsome stranger once she arrives, until he gets her fired. Not far off from a professional scandal, Clark Edgewater cannot allow some self-proclaimed curse breaker to ruin his last hope of redemption. After he fails to get Riley kicked off the survey site, he vows to avoid her. Unluckily for him, Riley vows to get even. Instead, Riley and Clark find themselves constantly around each other, and unfortunately for them, they fool around better than they fight. Alright friends, this is a classic case of a nice cover and an interesting summary. I fell for it, man. I fell for it. And I don't want to say that I hate this book because I don't hate this book, but I also did not really like it. There were plenty of parts that I thought were incredibly ridiculous. And I actually wrote notes while I was listening to this book. I listened to it as an audiobook, and I'm going to put them on the screen real quick. I'm also going to link my blog post where I posted them because I think they're a work of art. And possibly my favorite comment is, in all caps, the cat scratched her so hard, she's now bleeding onto Clark's underwear. And if you read the book, you know. If you didn't read the book, maybe consider reading the book. You might like it, even though I didn't. If you read the reviews for this book on Goodreads or Storygraph, you'll see quite a few people who talk about how the author destroyed Clark as an archaeologist by knowing nothing about survey sites or how archaeologists actually work, and just little nitpicky things like that. And mine isn't about archaeology, mine is about cats. Does Rosie Danan not have a cat? Has she never had a cat? Because the way she wrote the cat in this book is so unrealistic and I cannot get past it. So I think that this is just a hill that I'm just gonna have to die on. There was also a bit of an insta-love trope with Clark and Riley, which I didn't really like. I don't like the insta-love trope. Maybe that's because I'm more of a sentimental person, but I don't like the whole love at first sight thing, lust at first sight thing. And to be honest, I wanted to like this book more than I actually did. I will say, there were some good things. I really like that this is a he falls first book, because that inner dialogue was very, very fun, and I will not lie, it had to be smiling like an idiot at my desk. And the smut actually got a lot better. I didn't like the smut at first, and some of the scenes where Clark and Riley were more self-pleasuring. But yeah, I wasn't really a fan of the smut at first, but it did get better as it did get better as the book went on. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that by the end of the book, Riley and Clark are pretty much in love. They're kind of insufferable in that way. And so obviously the smut has gotten better because it's not just smut, now they actually love each other and care for each other. And it's just a lot more enjoyable. So maybe the problem is that I like my smut with some emotion. But overall, I felt like this book had a lot of nonsense. There were quite a lot of things that felt glazed over. The plot, I don't know, it comes and goes. It wasn't that strong of a plot, and I also think the author just wrote a lot of things that were ridiculous and took me out of the story, specifically the cat situation, that whole thing with the cat. Like I said, this is a hill I'm just gonna have to die on. It is what it is. But all of that aside, there were a few things I did like. I will give this book a solid 3 stars out of 5 stars. Was it my favorite read? Absolutely not would I recommend it if you're interested in witch history, weird archaeology, cats being described badly, and smut that improves, then yes, but otherwise, don't waste your time. The next book on the list is Throne of the Fallen by Kerri Maniscalco, and I'm not really proud of the summary that I wrote for it, but essentially in Throne of the Fallen we follow Prince Envy. This is his book. We have left Wrath and Emilia in the Kingdom of the Wicked series, and now we are on to Prince Envy. And in this book, his court is, I guess you could say it's cursed, so he goes on a mission to essentially save his court. Along the way, he meets our female main character, Camilla Antonius. I wouldn't say they're enemies to lovers, they're more reluctant allies to lovers. There was a lot of teasing and a lot of build-up and a lot of tension, and I really liked this book, but there obviously were things I didn't like. So with that being said, let's jump into that. If there was one thing that I wish was different about this book, I wish there wasn't so much smut. To be honest, half of this book is just smut, and I know Kerri Maniscalco says in a lot of her Goodreads notes and things like that, and on like her Instagram, that, you know, a lot of these more recent books are more adult in nature. There's a difference between adult and erotica, and I am not sure if Kerri Maniscalco knows that, because this was just a little bit too much, especially very early on. It felt very forced and it was very weird and I didn't like it. And there were also times where I really just wanted to focus on the plot, because there were a lot of things going on with Camilla that we don't learn until the very, very end. And I would have liked a few more hints dropped towards that than some of the more like sexual in nature chapters and scenes that we did get. And I will say, for this book being Envy's, it did nothing. It genuinely did nothing to make me like Envy more than I like Wrath. And I know, Wrath got 3 books, Envy only had 1, but this book was thick. Throne of the Fallen could have been 2 books. This book was very, very, very thick. I do like Camilla, however. Even though I didn't really like Envy, I did like Camilla. She's very feisty, she's very forge your own path, she's very I'm gonna do what I want whether you like it or not. And we like that in female main characters. Even though I complain about the smut in this book, the throne scene still makes me blush. That lives rent-free in my head. So thank you, Kerri Maniscalco, for that. But all the smut before it that wasn't part of the build-up to the throne scene, I could have done without, not gonna lie. I don't really have that many opinions on this book, to be honest. I was excited to read it because it's an extension of the Kingdom of the Wicked series. Yeah, I'm not a Prince Envy stan. I am patiently waiting for my Prince Pride, Lucia, and Vittoria. So until I have that in my hands, nothing else is gonna really do it for me. So 4 stars out of 5 stars. Solid read. If you're someone who really enjoys a lot of smut in your books, I'd recommend it. Or if you read the Kingdom of the Wicked series and you're debating reading this book, I would read it. But other than that, I think you can skip it. I think you can skip it, save yourself the time and the energy, and just read something else. And after Throne of the Fallen, I read The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. Alessandra Stathos is tired of being overlooked, so she has come up with a plan. Woo the Shadow King, marry the Shadow King, kill the Shadow King, and take his kingdom for herself. No one knows the extent of the freshly crowned Shadow King's abilities. Some say he can command his shadows to do his bidding. Others say his shadows speak to him, the thoughts of his enemies. Regardless of the gossip, Alessandra is finally going to get what is hers. But Alessandra is not the only one trying to kill the Shadow King. Despite attempts being made against his life, Alessandra finds her plans taking a back seat to regularly saving the Shadow King's life. Because after all, who better for a queen than a villainous queen? I'm just gonna preface this little review of my thoughts on this book with the fact that this book had to have been laced with something, because I loved it. And not much happened. If I'm being honest, not much happened. But I loved it so much. I loved it so much. I loved that there were elements, gave like Bridgerton vibes. I loved the Shadow Daddy. I loved Alessandra. I loved Alessandra as a main character. Like, if I liked Camilla, Alessandra is like 10 times whatever Camilla is. Like, she is so unrelenting, and I love that for her. I do think the like sex positive message of this book took me out of the era, just because a girl that was very openly promiscuous probably would not have been able to court, you know, the king. I digress. I will also say there's not a lot of foreshadowing to the plot twist that happens at the end, and there's also not a lot of world building. I kind of wish there had been more world building, and the plot also kind of falls a little bit flat the further the book goes on. I think just because I loved Alessandra and the king so much and their connection and chemistry that nothing else really mattered. And like I said, I just enjoyed this book so much. It was a vibe, it passed the vibe check, I had a good time, and honestly, sometimes at the end of the day, as long as you had a good time reading a book, nothing else really matters. Unsurprisingly, this book gets 4.5 stars out of 5 stars because I just had a grand old time. Shadow daddies, snarky, sarcastic, sex-positive female main characters with a bit of like Bridgerton vibes and a plot twist that you probably won't see coming, and a fairly satisfying ending, then I would recommend this book. And up next, we have a book that took me 2 months to read. And surprisingly, not because it's bad. I don't know. It took me a long time to read this book. And this book is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. Effie Sapphire has always believed in fairy tales. Haunted by visions of the Fairy King since she was a little girl, she's clung to her copy of, I'm gonna mispronounce this, and I apologize in advance, Angharad by Emrys Myrddin, as though her very life depended on it. The famous epic about a mortal girl who falls in love with the Fairy King, then destroys him. And when Myrddin passes away and his estate holds a contest to redesign the late author's family home, Effie leaps at the opportunity. Despite decrepit and waterlogged Hyrith Manor, Effie finds herself now stuck with an impossible task. While at the manor, Effie meets the stuck-up Preston Hellery, a literature scholar determined to expose Myrddin as a fraud. As the two rivals piece together the past, dark forces, both mortal and magic, conspire against them, and the truth may bring them both to ruination. So like I said, this book took me 2 months to read. I started it in October and I finished it in December. And like I said, I'm not really sure why this book took me so long, because I actually really ended up enjoying it. Of all the characters that I have spoken about so far, a lot of them have been snarky, go-getter women who are confident and sexy and ambitious, and Effie Sapphire is not like them, and that is why I love her. Effie Sapphire is the girl who practices her lines before she even dials to make a phone call, who sits in her car at the drive-thru Starbucks because she hasn't been to this one yet, and she recites her order before she even gets to the window because she doesn't want to mess it up. Effie Sapphire is a girl who shrinks herself to make those around her more comfortable. My anxious queen. I don't love her because she has characteristics that I want in myself. I love her because she's relatable. I am also that girl who rehearses what she's gonna say before she makes a phone call. I'm a lot better now. You know, I also used to stare at the Starbucks menu on the app on my phone before I would even go and order, because I had to know what I wanted, what size, any customizations, and I had to just deliver it perfectly. I really just love Effie. I also love Preston and their connection and their relationship. This book reminds me a lot of Divine Rivals, and I love Divine Rivals. Iris is also my other anxious girly. Her and Roman and Effie and Preston are just peas in a pod. They're just peas in a pod growing in my garden, and I love them. This book is also fairly short. I believe it's 260-ish pages, but it tackles some heavy topics, and I really liked that. Effie is the only girl that's been admitted so far into the architecture college, but she really wants to go to the literature college, but the literature college doesn't accept women, and you know, she has an advisor that was very predatory, and of course they started rumors that put Effie in a very negative light, and I really like that by the end of the book, all of the trouble that Effie and also Preston have gone through with not just Hyrith Manor, but also the school, really come together in a really nice conclusion, and I really liked that. I liked that for Effie, I liked that for Preston, and I liked that for the book also. There was one line, and I have a suspicion that Ava Reid wrote the last line of the book on purpose because she wants to write a sequel, and my opinion is write the sequel But please don't end it like that because I'm unwell now. But despite me taking a really long time to read this book, I actually ended up really enjoying it. And once I really started to get into the story, I found myself just not wanting to put my iPad down because I read it as an ebook. So a solid 4 stars out of 5 stars from me. If you like Divine Rivals, I would not walk, run to get a copy of this one from your library. And if you're into kind of creepy fairy tales and anxious girl and soft boy, I recommend this book. Just read it. And the last read of 2023 was Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. Thornhedge is the story of a kind-hearted, toad-shaped heroine, a soft-spoken knight, and a mission gone completely sideways. There is a princess trapped in a tower, but this story isn't about her. Rather, this story is about Toadling, a girl stolen from her crib by fairies. Having grown up in the safe, warm waters of fairyland, she is now asked to perform a simple task: return to the human world and offer a blessing of protection to a newborn child. It sounds simple, but nothing involving the Fae is ever simple. Centuries go by and a knight shows up, curious about the towering wall of brambles, where thorns are as large and sharp as swords. He's heard there is a curse that needs break, but it's a curse Toadling will prevent the breaking up. So a little earlier in 2023, I believe October, I read Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, and I wasn't really a fan. I didn't really like it, but I think that's because cozy fantasy can be a hit or miss for me, and I'm also not really a fan of the going on a quest kind of thing. But Thornhedge I did enjoy. I also just want to note that Thornhedge is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, because that is important. And if you do read this book, which is very small, I think it's about 100 pages, you should keep that in mind. Actually, I have a copy. Hold on. I completely forgot that I have a copy of this book. It's very small book. The story itself is like 111 pages. It's a very short book. It caught my attention. My local Barnes & Nobles is moving, so they had a 50% off sale and I had a gift card. So long story short, this is how I came to have a copy of Thornhedge. But like I said, this book is very short. It's a very quick read. I read it over the span of 2 evenings. I started it one night and then I finished it the next night. And I really like Toadling, but it's also kind of insulting because if Toadling had a little bit more of a backbone, I don't think this story would exist. Or it would, but it would be very, very different. The outcome would be very, very different. To be honest though, the Sleeping Beauty retelling aspect of this book doesn't really work for me. I think I would have preferred this story if it was more of just like a T. Kingfisher story on its own versus being a retelling, because a lot of the retelling aspects were really, really lost, and the aspects of T. Kingfisher were very strong. But I feel like as a retelling, it kind of fell flat. And I don't know, it's very creepy at some points. And I think that is T. Kingfisher coming through as the author. In terms of a retelling, I don't think it worked. I've said that like 5 times now. Because I genuinely don't have too many thoughts on this book. I felt very bad for Toadling. I wanted to give her a hug at some points. Just because this story is very cruel to Toadling, but I also feel like Toadling is one of those characters where you've made your bed, now you kind of gotta lie in it. The knight was also a little confusing. He was very nice. I liked him as a character, but the ending was a little unsatisfying, and that's kind of where I wish T. Kingfisher would have made the story a little bit longer, just to kind of flesh out the ending a little bit more. But honestly, it's just a very short, concise, to the point story, and I did enjoy reading it. So 4 stars out of 5 stars, because I actually did enjoy Thornhedge more than I enjoyed Nettle and Bone. And there are some other books of T. Kingfisher that I would like to read, so I'm not gonna rule her out based on my thoughts on Nettle and Bone. Thornhedge, 4 stars out of 5 stars. Pretty good read. I'm glad it was my last read of 2023, and I'm glad I got a copy because the book is very, very pretty. I like the cover. It got my attention. But But yeah, that's it. There you have it. December was an interesting month of reading. I read quite a bit. I read more than I thought I was going to read, to be honest. January has definitely been a little bit slower, as you will see in my January reading recap. I definitely did not read as much as December. I hit a bit of a slump, so that's okay. But 2023, I read 53 books. I don't remember most of them. I know that I enjoyed quite a few of them because I made a whole video on my favorites of 2023, so I did retain, you know, some information there. But for the most part, I think for 2024, I'd like to slow down a little bit and really digest the books I'm reading a little more. But in terms of December, it was a good month for reading. There were quite a few books on the list that I read: Throne of the Fallen and A Study in Drowning, that I had been wanting to read for a few weeks prior to getting copies from the library of them. So overall, it was a pretty good month of reading. I am not too disappointed because I liked a lot of the books I read, but I really did not like Do Your Worst by Rosie Danon. I feel like that book is the definition of missed potential because I think there were a lot of great aspects about that book that just ended up falling flat. But I also really enjoyed The Shadows Between Us, and I feel like most people did not like that. So teach their own. What I like, you might not like, and what you like, I might not like. So anyway, that said, I've talked enough for one video and I am so behind with this video as it is. So as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.